afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us here at Cabrini Green Legal Aid. We are so very excited to be welcoming our illustrious panel. Introductions include Josie Horace, who is one of our Leadership Council members and former Visible Voices member, State's Attorney Kimberly Foxx, new Public Defender Sharone Mitchell, and one of our very own Supervising Attorneys for Criminal Defense, Adam Kaney. And I'm Esther Franco-Payne, Executive Director of Cabrini Green Legal Aid. So we are so excited to have you joining us here today as we embark on this discussion as part of our annual spring campaign and our commitment to justice. Stand together with us. Today we'll be talking about a lot of different issues as it relates to racial justice, criminal justice reform, and equity. So we're very excited to have you here today, and I'll just kick it right off. You know, there's been a lot going on in this past year, as we know, right? We have this dual pandemic happening, as people have described it. One that consists of the virus, and the other having to do with this fight against equity, fight for equity against racial injustice, and the cause for social justice, right? So what have you observed, and any of our panelists can answer, what have you observed as the most significant impacts on communities of color during this dual pandemic?
It doesn't always have to be this way. There are deeply entrenched practices that changed in a matter of weeks and months. Policies that were decades away from passing that moved because of the momentum created by folks hitting the streets and demanding change. I think the most significant impact that we've seen is that we can change this system for the better. We can do the things that we've talked about doing, talking about the jail, having thousands and thousands of people in the jail, and then kind of because of COVID, starting to let folks out and let them live and let them defend themselves. Things that just weren't on the table have been on the table. So I'm so excited to see if we can take the things that we've done, the reactions to the system, and keep them in place and continue to move forward to make this community that we live in a more just place, a safer place.
I think that's right, all around. It's interesting that people have defined this last year as finally this reckoning around race, as though this country has not built its history on slavery and oppression of people. But this last year, this being gripped inside, unable to escape the inequities that you see across the board, where, when we were seeing the Black community devastated by COVID, and we knew that because of comorbidities that they were going to die at a higher rate, which exposed the inequities in healthcare that had already existed. All of these things that we knew and had taken for granted were on full display without the ability to turn our eyes. And then it was, to Attorney Mitchell's point, this inflection point of, well, we got to do something different. And the different was always possible. And so whether that is the work that we did in reducing the jail population and coming together, and that is now steadily risen again, but also the work that we were seeing around access to care. I'm looking at it now when we talk about the vaccine, and there are communities that are hesitant or don't have the ability to go to a place to get the care, and the care is coming to them. Or we saw people bringing food, we always had the capacity to do these things. And it was this kind of casual indifference to humanity, I believe, before this moment of, well, if you can't get it, then you just can't get it. And we've been forced to do better, to do more, to acknowledge that it doesn't have to be this way. And I think as it relates to the criminal justice system, in the wake of the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and now Daunte Wright, Adam Toledo, where people are looking at, we took for granted stories and narratives around, death at the hands of police. There were assumptions that were made, and it forced us to look and say, Is this the system that we've bought into? Is this the system that we believe to be legitimate? And not for the people who've been impacted, not as, Attorney Mitchell says when he sees the lights and the feeling that he has, but for those who live in communities that have had the privilege and the benefit of safety not being defined in the way that is defined in others, and then them having skin in the game, right? The advocacy, not from those who are just impacted by the system, but by those who have had the privilege and the luxury to look at it from afar and realize that in order for systemic change to be long-lasting, they have to have skin in the game too. I think that has been one of the most profound things that I've seen, and is what I am hopeful for the momentum to continue, the elevation of the voices who had already been crying out, coupled with those who can no longer turn away.
Thank you, State's Attorney Foxx. Adam or Josie?
It's been really personal because I saw various inequities on many levels. It took me back because I was born in the South during the civil rights, so I experienced many triggers. I experienced triggers on this disparate treatments in the medical field, as I saw the inequitable treatments as far as medical. I worked in healthcare before 27 years before I had to retire. So I experienced that last year being hospitalized, and seeing, having worked on that side and being on the other side, I saw the disparate treatments. I just saw so many things, and from the law enforcement perspective, being formally impacted, and that triggered, and seeing how the justice system handled things. So all of these were triggers. Mental health is important. So there was a lack of mental health, and how people saw the narrative. That narrative needs to be changed of what mental health is. So there were a lot of lapse in treatment for people and accessing that. So that needs to change in the future going forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think that it caused, there was an amplifying effect, much to Attorney Foxx's point, that, the pandemic took people out of their routine, and forced us at home, many of us, and then we were paying attention to this horrible virus that's going around, and seeing that it's affecting certain communities different than others, and it's affecting communities in economically differently, the morbidity rate differently, and I think it caused a lot of people to ask themselves why, and that opened a lot of eyes. And then you get the perfect storm of this sort of wave of police brutality that was going on, much of which was caught on video, and people were watching it and reacting to it in real time. And I think it just started this conversation like we've never had before in this country, because we weren't able to just get up the next morning or get up the next week and go back to work, and kind of just fades away again into the background. People really started caring about these issues in a way that I hadn't seen before. So I think that it's been good in that front, and it just caused people to open their eyes and see what's going on outside of their own little bubble, and think about how do we lift each other up, how do we reach out and make our communities more equitable for everybody. And I'm hopeful that trend continues, but just the way that it's just amplified everyone in the media and on social media and beyond has just been incredible.
So this week was a big week, right? As we are discussing, last year we watched the world unfold after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. And one of the things I struggle with sometimes as we discuss these issues is that it's not new, and it'll happen again. And we've seen that it continues to happen. But the world was on pause this week as we waited for the verdict of Derek Chauvin. And so what are your reactions or response to this verdict, given that, you know, it transpired the way a lot of people hope it would have? Any immediate reactions?
I can kick it off. You know, I think I'm actually still processing it. I've spent the majority of my career trying to keep people out of prison, so I almost feel hypocritical trying to advocate for someone to go to prison, but at the same time, you know, this has been a long time coming, that people just wanted accountability, you know, for something that has been going on for a long time, and this as a whole, this feels like it's been brewing since Rodney King, but of course it's been going on long before that. So I think there was a sense of vindication. I was holding my breath when they read that verdict. But you know, I think some people felt vindicated, and at the very least, you know, maybe it sends a better message that, you know, people are walking around now with cameras in their pocket, almost everybody. And I asked myself, if that nearly 9 minutes wasn't being recorded, would that verdict have been read guilty? And I don't want to be cynical, but I almost think maybe not. I'm not sure. So yeah, I'm still processing it. It's very fresh in our memory as we sit here today. But you know, I feel for people who have been victims of police brutality and have had loved ones who have been victims, that they maybe felt a little bit of redemption on that day.
For me, I chose not to watch the trial because that's emotional. I'm a mother of 2 black boys, 30 and 32, and I have been personally impacted by law enforcement in a negative manner. So that was a trigger for me. And I pray every day to be unbiased, because I know there are good law enforcement officers. But I would never forget those 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So having some of the best constitutional and criminal law professors in college, I remember what they taught me. So I know how his sentencing could go. I know he was convicted, but I'm not celebrating that fact. That was just a grain of salt to me. That's just the beginning. So I have many thoughts on that. My thought is about the many others that have gone unpunished. My main thing is about impunity. The House Bill 3653, criminal police certification. I really want to push that implementation of where police will be held accountable. I will really want to educate and aware about what defunding means, not taking away policemen, but changing that narrative. That's where my thoughts are.
I'm like Adam. I'm still processing, and I will acknowledge, even as you're asking the question, and I knew you were going to ask the question, that the trauma response was like welling up in me. Because I come at it in a couple different hats that I wear at the same time. I'm a part of a system, I'm a part of law enforcement that has historically not been accountable, and in a role, while recognizing the legal hurdles and how difficult it is to get a prosecution and then to get a conviction. There's a time when I watched the video last summer where I felt so helpless, and what am I doing and what makes a difference, and you question everything about your choices in life. I mean, I was in a real existential crisis last year because I have a job, I have a title that is part of something that is so horrifically and fundamentally broken. And because I have it, I own it. And when something like that happens, there's just a sense of hopelessness that you have. However well-intended you are as an individual, when systems of accountability don't necessarily exist, and that you yourself you're part of it. And what the law says, what is allowable, and then what is human, what's right. The other hat that I wear, my husband is, we've been together for a while, and I've watched over the last year the trauma that all of this has had on him. With each video where I have to tell him, don't watch, don't look, because there's a collective, I watched him feel unsafe, and we were in our home. And Tuesday night after the verdict, I didn't know what to expect from him. I was working. And I came home, and there was this line in his face that had been there for a minute that was gone. And we proceeded to watch the Method Man, Red Man versus. I'm just not gonna lie, we watched versus, and we were in a moment of joy that had seemed elusive. A moment of joy that my husband is a black man who was carrying so much. And at the end of it, he said, Kimmy, I don't know what would have happened if it went another way. And my heart broke. And so I'm still processing, and not unlike what Ms. Josie said or Adam, like, this isn't new. This wasn't unique. It was unique, I think, in the cold, callous, horrific, I know you are watching me and I believe that the systems will allow me to get away with it kind of way. Like, it wasn't I was in college when Rodney King happened, and even that was brutal, but there was this, like, you saw adrenaline coming from, like, a chase, and there was an adrenaline something. The cold nature of taking a man's life in the presence of people begging you to stop was otherworldly. And I think it spoke to the nature of what impunity looks like, what the evolution of impunity looks like. And I don't want us as a country, to the point that was made earlier, to, like, celebrate this moment and not sit in what this is. Like, I think there's a tendency for us in all of the discomfort to want to be able to be like, oh, we got past that. We got this thing. I think we, as a community, have to stay sitting in this, because that's how you fix it. And not in a performative way. I had to delete my Twitter, because I think it was the Raiders who put out a tweet that said, I can breathe now. And I was like, y'all gotta be kidding me, right? Like, this isn't commercial. I watched trauma manifesting itself in someone that I love very deeply, that I had missed because I had become so immune to it, and what that collective trauma is doing to our communities, what it's doing. And I think this case was emblematic of that. And while I felt relief, I realized the damage that has been done that isn't fixed with a verdict.
Thank you for sharing that very personal piece of your experience going through this, both of you. Public Defender Mitchell, would you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. Somebody sent me a tweet. The tweet said, if Chauvin is guilty, it does not mean that the system works or has fixed itself. It just means that the system was willing to sacrifice an officer to continue to move forward. And I kind of agree with that. You know, when you think about Mr. Floyd, the first thing as I think about is just like the despair of losing someone, and how family members are still grieving with the empty chair or empty bed, just a hole that doesn't ever get filled. And I can't stop but thinking about that first. I also think about, maybe because I'm a nerdy lawyer, I think about the press release that the police department issued right after Mr. Floyd died. It didn't talk about somebody standing on somebody's neck for 8 or 9 minutes. It didn't talk about an officer that had been disciplined for this before. It did not talk about community members, even babies, begging for the hurt to stop. It just talked about a man who resisted and a man who died resisting. And I can't help but to think, if Mr. Floyd didn't die, the pictures that we now put on walls would really be pictures, they'd be mugshots. He'd been arrested, probably would have been forced into a plea, and he'd have another felony conviction. And I think there are a whole lot of men just like him, men and women, increasingly women, just like him, who are forced into a system and are forced into bad outcomes because the stories that are told about them are only told from one perspective, and it goes unchecked. That's why I'm so proud that I'm a part of an office that is a resistance to that everyday practice. I can't help but to think about George Floyd and all the men and all the women like him. So I hope that this does not quench our thirst for justice. I hope that it increases our hunger and that we are vigilant. Thank you, State's Attorney. About wanting to eradicate that practice from happening over and over and over again, as it does in every city in the United States of America.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. Looking at social media this week, I've definitely appreciated the shift in the narrative to say that we received accountability and it's not true justice. So we definitely acknowledge that that is what it is, and that we have a much longer journey to travel to get to what justice looks like. So, Attorney Foxx and Attorney Mitchell, please, tell us about what's going on in your own respective offices. I think inquiring minds are always interested in, the efforts that you are employing to effectuate change. And so talk to us a little bit about your efforts to advance racial justice.
Go ahead, Sharone. You've been there for 4 weeks.
You've been here 4 weeks.
Yeah. I was in a discussion with Attorney Foxx last week. I told this joke. I'm gonna tell it again. I think it's a good joke. I was an advocate before I was a public defender, and I was one of the people trying to get Attorney Foxx to do stuff that I thought was good for our communities. And I would watch these beautiful speeches Attorney Foxx would give, and they would, for a long time, they would start, "I've been the state's attorney for 3.5 weeks. I've been the state's attorney for 2.5 months. I've been the state's attorney for..." I'm like, man, she does kind of a lot. Now I understand Attorney Foxx. I'm sorry about all the jokes I told in my head about that, because I'm doing county now. But no, when we talk about, racial justice, our day job is racial justice, right? I think getting people out of cages is racial justice, but doing that more effectively. Listen, we haven't always gotten it right. We always haven't done the best job. We haven't always treated our clients with the respect that they deserve, and it is my job to help improve that work. I see my clients, I see my brothers and my sisters and my aunties and my uncles, and maybe our office hasn't always done that. And I know that we have the reputation of, talking people into pleas. Quite frankly, as a public defender, I did that too much for my liking. But the reason was simple. we have a justice system that forces people into incarceration. We have pretrial incarceration that keeps them locked up before they ever or any evidence has been presented against them. And then we have sentencing structures that incentivize people to take pleas instead of actually going to trial and actually testing whether those stories I talked about a few minutes ago is actually true. So it'll be important for me to improve the ability of our office to advocate, but it will also be important for me to ensure that my office, is filled with people who have been fighting mass incarceration and wrongful convictions and permanent punishments for their entire career, to get their perspectives to the table when we're talking about making changes to our justice system, so that we're not always advising people to take the plea, that we can tell people, hey, let's take this thing to trial because I believe you. I think that what you're saying to me is right, and you should have the right to be in front of your peers and tell your story. So we have work to do, but I think for me, our day job, right, is racial justice. Getting people out of cages is racial justice, and I hope to improve the ability of our office to do that in the next 6 years.
So I've been state's attorney for 4 years, 4 months, and 21 days.
How many hours?
8 hours. And I feel compelled to keep doing it because this is a system, an office that I inherited that has a long history that predates me. And one of the things, as I said, I think it's an office where people come to because they want to do good. Like you want to advocate. You hear people say, "I want to advocate on behalf of victims. I want to advocate on, I'm going to advocate." And the issue of racial justice was not something that was talked about in the office. It is one of those places, and I worked there for 12 years, right, where it is, I don't see race. I see this victim. I see just this thing that's right here. And I think how we are allowed to kind of perpetuate these issues around the racial injustices is by not acknowledging the thing that is right in our faces, right? That's right in our faces, that if my office is majority white and we have a minority, people of color, but the overwhelming majority of our victims are black and brown, and the overwhelming majority of our defendants are black and brown, that there is a reality that we're talking about here that is rooted in race, and we do no service by not acknowledging that. Take cases involving victims out. People don't know, the State's Attorney's Office here in Cook County, 40% of our cases are drug cases. CGLA knows that because you are working to expunge many of these. Sharone, you know that. In a city that's grappling with violence, 40% of our resources are going towards drug cases. And the overwhelming majority of people who we are seeing on drug charges are black or brown. And what would happen is we don't make arrests. We're not involved in policing. Our office gets involved when they come to us. And so when you say, man, I see all of this overrepresentation of like certain communities, there was this reflexive of we don't do that. And being able to say, well, why do we police the South and the West Side differently? I know for sure that drug use, just taking drugs, is pretty standard across racial demographics. How is it that only black and brown people are being arrested and prosecuted for drug offenses? And the reflexive, we don't control for that. And so one of the things that I've tried to do, and it has been incredibly controversial, it has been painful, if I'm being honest, is to introduce these concepts of this is not race neutral. And to pretend otherwise is to perpetuate a system of racism. And when you talk about systemic racism, when you talk about institutional racism, and own that our office has a role in that, people get very defensive, become very afraid, And again, why this movement this time matters so much, because we're having more of these conversations about racism. What does it mean to be anti-racist? And organizations, corporations are like looking into how are they addressing these things. But it is really hard in institutions that have been rooted in this for so long to be self-reflective. And so some of the work that we are doing is, where people might think it's mundane, like our data transparency. How about we just publish all of our felony data, and then we put the racial demographics in there, and then everyone can see what we already know anecdotally, and then we can start asking the questions. And then we can, because data just allows you to ask more questions and then be reflective. Aren't people being sentenced the same? One of the things that we found is that we were seeing these disparities in sentencing, and largely it was driven by people's backgrounds, right? So if you had a previous conviction or you had been arrested, but if your policing strategies impact a certain community for like a lot of these low-level offenses, you're gonna have a background, which then means that you're gonna have a higher sentence, and that is related to race. And so we have to disabuse ourselves of this neutrality thing, use data, to use the language. We've hired a chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer at our office to go to the culture. And my good friend, the public defender, will learn very quickly that there is policy and then there is culture. And as the saying goes, culture eats policy for breakfast. And if you don't attack the culture, if you don't, and do it in a way that recognizes and meets people where they are, recognizes that it's very difficult to have these conversations, it's difficult as a country, it's really difficult in an institution that right now is under a lot of scrutiny, and people are feeling defensive because I just want to do good work. These people want to do good work. I too think that they are the best law firm. We have the best law firm in the state.
Maybe.
They want to do good work. But if we don't arm them with the impact of every decision that we make and the role that it plays in perpetuating systemic racism, no matter what policy initiative I introduce, whether it's not prosecuting this or not prosecuting that, it will manifest itself in some other area, because it requires a fundamental shift in culture that is informed through a lens of racial equity. And we have to do, every decision that we make must be informed through the lens of racial equity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That's a heavy lift.
Which is why it's only been 4 years, 4 months, and 21 days. It's a heavy, it is the thing, I said to Attorney Mitchell, I wanted to talk to him, it is the thing that we don't talk about enough when we talk about these institutions. And I think it's the thing that gets advocates so frustrated, where they say, well, Foxx, you say this, but I'm seeing this here. How do you bridge the disconnect? Because if you have done something for so long, to your point, even introducing, Attorney Mitchell knows the reputation that his office may have, even in our communities, for the good work that they are doing. And he can hear and understand and accept that. The masses may feel a little like, what do you mean? I could be making all this money. Of course I care. But if they can't hear you, it doesn't matter what you think of yourself, if your client, if your communities. And so bridging that gap, it won't be done in my tenure. It won't. And that's not me waving the white flag. It just has taken so long to create that we have to be honest with ourselves. So you have to be real intentional, lean all the way in, sit in all of this discomfort, because if you don't move the needle even a smidge, it won't not just move, it will revert back.
Yeah, very quickly. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. Josie, how do you think that the needs and voices of communities should be considered as part of these efforts that the state's attorney and public defender just described?
I think our needs and voices should be considered from the vantage point of when people come in, they should come in with from the point of sitting and listening and not telling. Because we live there. I'm making an I statement. Now, I currently don't live in the city of Chicago. I live in a in a different environment. But I would, if I could, I would. And this is one of the reasons why I've been lobbying and advocating for housing, because of my felony statement. I think that we should be heard and we should be invited to these tables, because you all can tell our story, because you may have heard our story secondhand, but nobody can tell our story and better than we can. So this is why it's imperative that when you come in to share or teach or do whatever, listen to us. Take a moment and learn and be willing to understand what our oppression, our trauma means, and go forward from there. That's what's important. Because just because we have been formally incarcerated, that one of the campaigns that I am involved in with my 501c3 is I am not my record. I've been out of prison 34 years. Something I did back then should not be affecting me now, especially since it was supposed to be commuted. How long will we be permanently punished? So these are things that should be taken into consideration going forward when we do these collaborative ventures. That is what matters, implementation and changes within the community, education and awareness. I'm going to keep preaching that.
Thank you. Keep preaching, Josie. Adam, do you have anything to add?
Not much more, because my panel mates here could not have put it much better. You know, one way that we can get the community involved is, again, having wonderful, wonderful people like Josie sit on panels like this, and giving members of the community a seat at the table. I agree with everything that Attorney Mitchell said, and I've experienced that in my practice, and I agree with every single thing that Attorney Foxx said, and I understand where she's coming from, you know, and as a defense attorney who works in the trenches, I understand where she's coming from. Attorney Foxx can't be in room 30 whatever, you know, on my case, People versus XYZ, saying, well, this is how we need to approach this case. She just can't. So as defense attorneys, we see that we feel that frustration that, you know, our clients aren't really being heard, that, you know, the whole world is kind of against them, and they bear that weight. So, you know, if we can make sure that they have a voice at the table and that they're being heard, and that the needs that are causing criminal activity and criminal justice involvement are being properly addressed, which I believe these two fine attorneys to my left fully understand, then we can do great things. So not much to add. I think that my panel's right on.
Who do you think has a better law firm?
CGLA.
I was going to say mine.
CGLA.
I was going to say mine.
Thank you very much.
I was a part of CGLA, so I can take that. I can accept that.
We can claim you, Sharone. We can. Oftentimes, we hear this phrase, reimagine justice. How would you reimagine justice, and what does that look like to you?
I think we might need to do a little bit more than reimagining if we want to get where we want to get to. But with that said, you know, justice to me, how I would reimagine it is that how you come to the justice system or the legal system, what you look like, your color, where you're from in the community, who's accusing you of the offense, doesn't determine exactly what happens to you. And that's what happens in the system, right? If you are poor, you will get worse outcomes. If you are charged with harming somebody that has more power in the community, your outcome will be worse. If you can't communicate as well as the next person, your outcome will be worse. So we have to think, I think, very seriously about how the system treats people that comes to it. But I think we also need to think about what we're being realistic about what justice means, and not being okay with just doing the things that we've always done before. There are so many things that we do in this system that we do not because it has been determined it is the best thing to do. We just are resigned to the fact that that's how we done it before. So justice to me means being realistic about what we're trying to do, what the ends are, and being brave and courageous on getting to those ends. And it will take lots of work and lots of courage and lots of people on the street demanding change, but we'll see where we go.
You know, I struggle too with the Reimagine Justice. I struggle because every day we do things in the name of justice that aren't just, that just aren't. And to Attorney Mitchell's point, because we've always done them, we talk out of both sides of our neck when we talk about people needing help for substance use disorders. It's a public health issue. Gun violence is a public health issue. You know, we talk about all of these root causes and invest all of our money in the response and not the prevention. All of our efforts go into reacting to the thing and not treating. And so for me, justice, it would be fundamentally shrinking the footprint of the criminal justice legal system, fundamentally shrinking it, where we're not dealing with the societal ills that we are not equipped to handle. I was telling somebody earlier, this is the only business model where you could have a 60% failure rate. Right? If I'm judged by my folks sending people to prison, and people are like, what's your conviction rate? And then my question is, what's the recidivism rate? If the people who are going into our prisons are still dealing with the issues that got them there in the first place, if we just disabuse ourselves that bad people just do bad things and that these conditions, and then they come back and do it again. I keep hearing in this city the repeat offenders. People love Kim Foxx. What about these repeat offenders? The system is set up for repeat offenders. The system is set up for that. What if we didn't accept a failed model that we all know is a failure and took resources and dealt in community with the people who know the people who live there and what the needs are, and embraced that there, and only used this mechanism, the lawyers, on the lawyerly things that actually bring harm. And even in doing that, trying to find ways that people don't commit additional harm, addressing their own harm. The reality is, I meant to say this earlier, in our advocacy for victims, a good portion of my victims have also been clients of Mr. Mitchell. We don't talk about that enough. A lot of my victims were formerly defendants, and vice versa. We swap clients a lot. And if we know that we have this kind of perpetual cycle of harm and hurt, even in violent offenses, and we don't do anything to stop that cycle, is that justice? And so for me, it's fundamentally shrinking what involves jails and prisons and courts, fundamentally shrinking that, getting to the root of what is it? And then even for those things that come, working and asking ourselves, not just, well, how do we just punish you? How do we make sure you don't do this again? How do we stop the harm from being inflicted from you onto someone and then onto yourself? And it's messy. I don't know what I don't have the visions of unicorns and stuff jumping in the Reimagine Justice world. It would really be fundamentally stopping doing a lot of the things that we know aren't working. And that would shrink our footprint, and we could focus on resources to get people the help that they need.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we need a justice system that is just frankly less punitive. Because at the end of the day, when I walk into a courtroom with my client, they are perceived as guilty until proven innocent. That's the perception. That's the perception that I have as their advocate, and that's the perception they have as the defendant. From the judges, from many of the prosecutors, and from possibly many members sitting on a potential jury. So it's a hurdle that they have to jump, and we have laws that perpetuate that. Like Illinois has a 3-strike law. I have a client who went to jail on it was an aggravated assault charge, right? It ended up being a Class 2 felony, but because of the way the law is written in Illinois, he was going to be Class X by background on just an aggravated assault for 2 cases that he picked up in his 20s. He was 50 years old when he stood trial. The jury did not know that he was going to be facing 6 to 30. He was convicted on the word of police alone. There was no evidence entered, and he sits in prison for that because of the man that he was 30 years prior. And that's the system that we have. And we could make that argument at sentencing, but at the end of the day, the minimum's 6. So we need the laws to not reflect punishment, because I think we've seen over the course of 200 years that that's not really effective. So having a higher focus on treatment. Here at CGLA we work with social workers. I think social workers can do a lot of good in the criminal justice system. And working with a social worker instead of a corrections officer, I think could make a world of difference in a lot of people's lives on the other side of trial. So I think that kind of a focus and that kind of an approach over time can make a world of a difference and save the city a lot of money.
Thank you, Adam. Josie, did you want to contribute to this one?
Yes, ma'am. I thought long and hard about what reimagining justice meant, so I ain't gonna take long. I wrote something down. She knows I'm a preacher, Miss Kim. So 2 of my favorite scriptures are Micah 6:8 and Amos 5:24. And Micah 6:8 says, "He has shown thou, O man, what is good, what the Lord has required of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God." Amos 5:24 says, "But let justice run down as the waters and righteousness as a mighty stream." So we all know that water is refreshing, it's nourishing. So there are a lot of desolate areas here in Chicago. As reimagining justice, I envision Lady Justice. Her eyes are blinded. So to me, behind that blindfold are festering sores. So she needs to be given antibiotic with justice, so it can be cleared up. So she needs to be unbiased, so she can declare just sentencing. Reimagining justice means that her sword that has been dulled by years of disparate treatment to be sharpened by the irons of justice that is swift. Reimagining justice means that her unbalanced scales will once again allow due process under the law, put it into single stories or the narrative that has been just us as opposed to justice, Justice. So that's what reimagining justice means to me.
Thank
Short
you.
and simple.
Thank you,
Amen.
Josie. Well, we're coming to a close. It's been a great discussion. In closing, what would you say to our listening audience about how they can participate in the fight for equity?
Start. I swear to you, Esther didn't make me say this, but listen. I think supporting organizations that are dedicated to providing equity for this society. I think Cabrini Green Legal Aid does a lot of that. I think having access to clean water, safe housing, being able to go past what your record tells you, past allegations, and just be a member of society that can live and be free is incredibly important. And there are lots of organizations in this city that are doing that. I think Cabrini Green is one of them, so supporting those organizations. I think also holding our leaders accountable. You know, we've talked a lot about the great things that this Safety Act has done, but there are even more changes that need to be made to the laws of our city, our state, and our country. And, you know, because we've built a wall that separates the truth from justice for decades, like literally decades. So just one law isn't going to change that. One act is going to change that. We have to continue to return to the job of providing a safe community and equal, fair laws for us. So I think about things that are moving through the legislature right now. There are laws moving through the legislature that will change small uses, small possession of controlled substances from a felony to a misdemeanor, right? That's moving through. Just got through the House right now. Yeah, got through the House right now. Representative Ammons. Those things we need to be doing. There are laws that are moving through the legislature right now, ensuring that we can't trick children into confessing to crimes that they likely didn't commit. That's a law that's moving forward right now. We're doing things like allowing the public defender to be able to represent clients with dual clients that are both in immigration court and clients that are have criminal cases, allowing us to be able to defend people in immigration court. There are so many things that we need to do. So ensuring that your leaders, the people that represent you, are on board and supporting the organizations that are doing that work, I think those are things that you can do in the fight for equity.
Obviously, support Cabrini Green Legal Aid. That's why we're here tonight, this afternoon, because our work is incredibly vital, incredibly vital. The appreciation of a holistic approach that people are more than just one singular issue matters. And if we're going to disrupt kind of this cycle of recidivism, we have to treat them whole. And that's what Cabrini Green Legal Aid does. And so I too, Esther did not tell me to say that, but I've been around long enough to know we are here for you all to do what we need to do to keep Cabrini Green Legal Aid going. The other thing that I would say, and this I should probably have not ended on a controversial note, but I just will. I find that a lot of people who, particularly in the philanthropic space, feel like philanthropy feels good. It feels good to I'm doing something with my check. And I need not just the check, but the check on ourselves, on how we respond in the things that are happening. This isn't charitable work. This isn't charity. When those who have the least among us are suffering and we see what happens as a result of that, we are not at our best as a community, as a whole. This isn't favor for them. This is not to feel good because you have helped this one person. Our community right now, and I say community, our Chicago County community, is not at its highest when we have 7-year-olds gunned down in McDonald's parking lots with their parents. Because what I know is that little girl, if I from 624 West Division could grow up to be the Cook County State's Attorney, first Black woman to do this work, child of a single parent, all of the issues that Cabrini Green Legal Aid seeks to address. My mother suffered with mental health issues, bipolar, self-medicated with marijuana. My mother was never a criminal, but she was doing things that this system right now would criminalize. She needed help. But her daughter got to ascend to be in this space. How many daughters, how many sons who can change the trajectory of this country are we allowing to languish in a system that we know is doing harm? This isn't charity. This isn't charity. This is our fundamental responsibility to make sure that the least among us are able to thrive so we can all thrive. And the final check on that is, so this isn't to make you feel good. This is because our communities need this. This is a needed service. And the final check is, we're in the middle of an uptick in crime. We're in the middle of like what feels like a time of despair. As you write your check, also recognize that we can't be reflexively doing the things that we know don't make us safe. Provide the cover. provide the, as we work on bail reform and Public Defender Mitchell and I, before he came, we're talking about this for years. I've sat and testified. And then when things get crazy, this week alone, I've heard, it's gone too far, it's gone too far, it's gone too far. For all the things that we're saying, let's do more. We cannot reflexively do the thing that we were told made us safe and we know better. Check yourself. When you watch the news and you see the violence and you say, what can I do? It is not to push for things that we know didn't work. It is to invest in organizations like Cabrini Green Legal Aid. It is to trust the work that has been done. And it is to recognize that it is a bigger investment than one individual. It's an investment in our communities.
First of all, I would like, as a formerly incarcerated person or any person in general, I would like to say to the community that we need to stop interchanging the word equity with equality. We don't need equality. We are asking, or shall I say we demand equity, because it is equity what is going to catapult us further into the future. And I need for people to understand that how grassroots advocacy and lobbying and policy making works is not top down, it's bottom up. And in order for things to change, we have to get out there and put our boots to the ground. We can't get on social media and complain. If we want change, we have to become a part of the solution. We have to demand people who are in positions of power. We have power. We have to come to them and present our problems. They don't know if we have a problem, if we are sitting behind closed doors complaining to each other. So when our leadership council at Cabrini Green or any other organization in the city, when we have these seminars or Know Your Rights or whatever presentations we present, come to them, because we're presenting valuable information that can be utilized, that can empower entire communities. So don't complain that nothing is being done when you don't come out and avail yourselves. So we need help when we offer things to people to help them. So this is what I advise when we, as leaders in various communities across the city, come and utilize these resources, because they're out there. You can't do better until you know better. So avail yourselves. Help us help ourselves to be better and do better.
Thank you, Josie. Adam, you have the last say here.
Appreciate it. As it was said before, time and or money is a big way to get involved. If you're able to volunteer some of your time to help out in organizations like CGLA, or give some money, because this is like Ms. Foxx said before, this isn't charity. This is an organization that's just doing the work that needs to be done, and when you help fund it, you help perpetuate that great work that's being done. And again, Esther's my boss, and she did not tell me to say that. But I truly believe that. Get out there, get your boots on the ground, talk to people, and try to be part of helping organizations like CGLA and otherwise that are doing this kind of work.
But CGLA first.
Agreed.
CGLA first. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We've come to an end. This was a wonderful conversation. I thank you for sharing your personal stories, your perspectives, and your work with us today, and to our listening audience. We appreciate you, and we thank you for standing together with us and for your commitment to justice. Let us continue to collaborate, support each other, and do the work that needs to be done. So thank you.
Thank you.